How my ex's arrest for abuse exposed the hidden truth about our family. 33 years old female, and I have two kids, a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. My ex-husband and I divorced when I found out he was cheating on me with another mom from our younger son's school group. Despite the betrayal, I agreed to share custody because I wanted my children to have their father in their lives. Unfortunately, since the divorce, his involvement has been minimal. He only shows up to pick them up for visits and often spends time with his stepchildren, rarely including our own kids. He claims these outings are spur of the moment and can't always include them, but it felt unfair, especially since I've always made an effort to include him in our children's lives. Eventually, I stopped pushing, but I've never felt right about how he keeps his distance. Recently, I decided to upgrade my older son's computer, and when he asked if we could give his old one to his cousin, my brother's son, I agreed. My brother has been a great support to my kids. He helps take them to school events when I can't, and he often takes them to the park or on trips when I'm too busy. My ex, on the other hand, is rarely there for them. Anytime I ask him for help with something, he always has an excuse. He's out of town, busy with work, or occupied with other things. Ironically, he's always available when his stepkids need something. I even witnessed him arguing with his stepkid's father at a school event, claiming he had every right to be there. When my ex found out I had given the computer to my nephew, he was upset. He complained that if I could afford to give a gift like that, I should have forgiven the 2 months of child support he missed because he was having financial trouble with a new baby. He even suggested that if I could give away a computer, I should have gifted it to either his kids or his stepkids, who share a single computer among the three of them. I told him my finances were none of his concern and that I owed nothing to his stepchildren. Then, his wife jumped in, accusing me of spoiling my son by giving him a new computer and being petty for letting my son bring it to their house. She even claimed it was just to show off in front of his step-siblings. I told her she had no right to speak to me like that or question my decisions. I also reminded her that I allow my kids to see their father so they can grow up with him, not so she could interfere with how I choose to parent. My ex was offended, but I made it clear that this situation could have been avoided if his wife had stayed out of it. Things seemed to calm down after that until last week, when I went to pick up the kids and found my ex visibly upset. He explained that he had tried reading a bedtime story to our youngest son, who still likes to be read to before bed, usually by me, his brother, or my brother. If none of us are around, he listens to audiobooks. My ex wanted to connect, so he offered to read to him, but our son turned him down, saying he didn't need him for that because he could do it himself. My ex then stayed to listen as he searched for a story for 8-year-olds without a dad on his tablet, and it hit him hard. The next day, my ex offered to take our older son to basketball practice, but our son said he would be going with his dad. He quickly corrected himself and said, "Uncle." That really angered my ex, and when I came to pick up the kids, he confronted me about it. I told him that if our children feel like they don't have a father, it's because of his own actions. He tried to shift the blame to me, saying I was pushing him away from his role. I told him it was up to him to show up for his kids, not something I could do for him. I reminded him that he was the one who broke our family and that he had chosen to focus more on his stepchildren than on our own. I made it clear that if he didn't change his behavior, he couldn't expect much from them in the future. After that conversation, his mom called me. She's always been polite, but I felt the need to tell her that I would have appreciated her concern for her grandchildren when she supported her son's affair, knowing it was tearing apart our family. She hung up, and we haven't spoken since. My brother advised me that I had every right to express my feelings, but he suggested I shouldn't have said these things in front of the kids. Later, my ex texted me, saying that if I weren't so difficult, he'd spend more time with the children. I responded by telling him that his duty as a father isn't dependent on whether I'm easy or not, and that I've never prevented him from seeing the kids. The truth is, when it comes to choosing between his own children and his stepchildren, he prefers the latter, and that's something only he can change. These past few days have been quite unusual, to say the least. First, I want to thank everyone who reached out with advice. I never expected to receive so much support, and honestly, I didn't realize this app would be so helpful. It's not very popular where I live, so I didn't know how much I could benefit from it. Now, let's get back to the situation. My ex-husband sent me a message saying he wanted to resolve our issues, stop arguing, and have a conversation. I agreed to meet with him. He came over and we didn't waste any time, straight to the point. He asked me if I truly thought he was a bad father. Without hesitation, I replied, looking back now, I never would have chosen you to be the father of my children. He explained that things haven't been easy for him either. I told him that they haven't been easy for me either, as I've had to take on both his role and mine. He went on to say that he couldn't leave his stepchildren without a father, claiming that he had already broken their family. I responded that he had left his own children without a father. That's when he started crying, telling me it was my fault because I refused to forgive him after the affair and wouldn't go to couples therapy. I wasn't kind in my responses, but everything I said was the truth. He then asked if I didn't feel sorry for him, given his current state, and I answered, no. He looked at me in disbelief, telling me that he didn't think I could be that cruel. I told him that after everything, changing jobs, pulling the kids out of school, moving houses, and watching him continuously disappoint our children, any empathy I had felt for him had turned into complete apathy. After that, he left. Later, his mother called me. She said she knew what I'd told him, that he hadn't stopped crying, and she couldn't understand how I could be so filled with hatred. She suggested I just get over it. I replied, with all due respect, what I said wasn't out of hatred, but out of truth. If your son is crying, it's because he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. Maybe instead of worrying about how he feels now, you should have taught him responsibility and respect for others. She then said that I didn't know what it was like to feel a mother's love and see her child suffer. I replied, I do understand. I have 2 children who cry over a living father. 2 children who see their dad being a father to other kids while he doesn't have time to be their father. She tried to apologize for him, but I told her not to put words in his mouth and that I didn't want to hear anything more about her son. I ended the call, feeling the urge to cry, but I couldn't afford to. As a mother, I've got responsibilities. I want my children to feel safe, loved, and strong enough to stand on their own, without needing anyone, not even me, to define who they are. Last Thursday, I took my kids to a birthday party for their cousin, hosted by my ex-sister-in-law. I still have a good relationship with her. She was the one who told me about the affair and how her mother had encouraged it. When my ex showed up at the party, he was alone and visibly irritated. My kids kept their distance. They kissed his hand but ignored him after that. My ex-mother-in-law scolded the kids for not showing more respect to their father. My eldest replied that he couldn't respect him because of how he and his partner talk badly about me. I didn't scold my son for what he said, but for how he said it to his grandmother. I told him it was wrong to eavesdrop on private conversations and repeat them. Then I asked him to gather his things, as we were leaving. My ex-mother-in-law asked me not to leave, claiming the kids were enjoying themselves and that we could resolve things like adults. She asked my ex what had happened, but he claimed not to remember. I told her I didn't care and that we needed to be good people first to be good parents. I reminded her that being a good parent requires more than just the bare minimum, especially when you have responsibilities to your own children. My ex became agitated, and his mother asked why we couldn't have a civilized co-parenting relationship. I told her that everything I've mentioned here, his free will to see the kids, the lack of a proper custody arrangement, was a clear indication of why we couldn't. My ex didn't want to talk about it, saying he had too many kids at home. His mother then told him that his biological children should be the ones who felt comfortable and that the others should get that comfort from their own father. Things escalated when my ex began accusing me of making everything harder than it needed to be. He blamed me for everything, as usual. I asked him to clarify how it was my fault. You can see the kids whenever you want. What more do you want? I was done with the conversation and told him that if he thought I was being petty, I'd show him what uncivilized really looks like by filing for overdue child support payments. His mother asked what I meant by overdue payments. I explained that he was 3 months behind on child support. She was furious, slapped him across the face, and demanded to know where the money for his children had gone. He answered, I couldn't let JR miss out on going to the same school as my son. I didn't want him to feel inferior. His mother couldn't believe it, and they started arguing. I quietly walked out of the house. Just to add context, My youngest son attends a private school, and my ex pays for his stepson to attend the same school. Yesterday, my ex's mother came over and said she would pay the overdue fees. She handed me the cash in person. I knew my ex would be furious. For context, my ex's mother doesn't work, doesn't own anything, and lives with my ex-sister-in-law. However, she has significant savings from an inheritance. If she pays the tuition, my ex knows that there won't be much left for him when she passes, even though she's still in good health. He's been trying for years to get her to invest in his business ideas, but she's always refused. In retaliation, my ex didn't pick up the kids this weekend. Yesterday, my ex-sister-in-law called me. She didn't know all the details yet, but apparently my ex's 15-year-old stepson punched him in the mouth. She said she would keep me updated once she finds out what happened. And as a side note, the new custody agreement will likely take a year to finalize. The court has prioritized the overdue child support payments, so the rest can wait. The response I received from the court? We have more urgent cases. As I mentioned before, my ex's stepson got into an argument with him because my ex refused to let him go out. Now, I have more details on what happened. The boy had plans to go bowling with some friends, and his biological father had already given him permission, as well as money for the outing. But when he told his mother, she told him he couldn't go because they needed him at home to watch his younger siblings. My ex and his wife had planned a trip and needed someone to stay with the kids. This led to a heated argument between the boy and his mother. The boy raised his voice to her, and my ex stepped in to demand that he show respect. The boy, frustrated, responded that my ex wasn't his father. In an attempt to assert his authority, my ex told the boy that as long as he lived under their roof, he had to follow their rules. The boy ignored him and turned to leave. My ex followed him and put a hand on his shoulder to stop him. That's when the boy turned around and punched him, shouting that he wasn't his father and that he could never compare to him. The mother scolded her son for his behavior, but the boy, still furious, shouted back that he hated her. This account was shared with my ex-mother-in-law by my ex and his wife, who were hoping to gain her sympathy and convince her to look after the kids, both stepchildren and the baby, so they could go out. However, my ex-mother-in-law refused, telling them she wouldn't take care of the children. When I spoke to my ex, he briefly mentioned that he was dealing with family issues and claimed that the boy's biological father was turning him against him. He didn't give me many details, and he left out most of what my sister-in-law had shared. He simply told me that, because of the situation, he wouldn't be able to pick up our children this weekend. The 15-year-old boy is now staying with his biological father. Regarding child support, my ex is now 3 months behind on payments. The payment he missed 2 months ago was supposed to be made that same week, but he didn't pay, leaving him 3 months behind. In the end, my ex's mother covered the overdue amount for him. As for the child who attends the same school as my son, it isn't the 15-year-old involved in the altercation. It's his younger stepbrother, who is 8 years old, the same age as my son. I decided to enroll my son at that school after my ex's affair came to light. At the time, I worked as a kindergarten teacher there, and the boy had been one of my students. We all knew each other, and I wanted to protect my children from any potential rumors. So, I transferred them to a private school just 2 months before the school year ended. Thanks to some kind people and the circumstances, we were able to get them admitted. First of all, I don't know much about how subreddits work, but someone told me that my profile was shared on one, and I have a few things to say to those involved. The discussion seemed to revolve around how I could afford private school tuition on a kindergarten teacher's salary. Let me set the record straight. I'm no longer a kindergarten teacher. I'm a high school teacher now. Salaries in education vary widely depending on the country, and in my country, salaries in education are quite competitive compared to other fields. To give you some context, here's a breakdown of salaries in my country. Micro businesses, $280. Small businesses, $315. Medium-sized businesses, $350. Large businesses, $370. In my field education, the salary ranges are as follows. Early education, kindergarten, $800 to $1,000. Primary education, $900 to $1,100. Secondary education, $1,100 to $1,300 US. Secondary education with 5 years of experience, $1,300 to $1,400 US. Associate professor, master's degree, $1,050 to $1,400 US. Full professor, doctorate, $1,400 to $1,750 US. The cost of living here is affordable, and I've mentioned this in several comments. I'm not from the United States, where life is more expensive. In my country, the salary I earn is more than enough to live comfortably. I'm not rich, but my kids enjoy an excellent quality of life. Private school tuition varies depending on the institution. Some schools cost as little as $120 US per month, while elite schools charge much more. And just to clarify, we use our local currency, not dollars. I also have other sources of income, but that's irrelevant to this discussion. Now, let's clear up the speculation. Some people assumed I was from multiple countries, calculated my monthly tuition costs, and even tallied up all my expenses. The one thing you missed was factoring in the cost of my divorce. Let me save you some trouble. I didn't pay a single cent, and my ex left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Be careful not to choke on that. As for the claim that my kids aren't well cared for, my children are perfectly fine, and as long as I'm breathing, no one will take them away from me. I saw a lot of concern for my kids, but here's a question for you. What about your own kids? Are they okay? Did you pay what you owe for their care? When was the last time you saw them? There's no need to worry about my kids. If any of the users who discuss my finances are interested in more details, feel free to contact me. I'll gladly send you some bills for you to pay, since you're so concerned about my financial situation. Now, about my divorce. It was far from amicable, not because custody was an issue that was never in question, but because my ex lied at every turn to delay and obstruct the process. I didn't accept it then, and I still don't. I never will. Not in a million years. To those still questioning my divorce, here's something for you to think about. Once there's infidelity, there's no family left. This clarification isn't for those who offered helpful comments or advice on my post. Consider this the end of my informational break. Now, for the actual update. The day after my post here, my ex was arrested for domestic violence and child abuse. The father of the boy involved filed a complaint. My ex's wife defended him, claiming that her son was a brat and that this wasn't the first time he had been violent, both with my ex and with his younger siblings. I was shocked by this because, as far as I know, my ex never mentioned that the teenager had been physically abused. My ex-sister-in-law confirmed that her brother never brought it up either. I asked my kids if their stepbrother had ever touched them or been violent with them, and both said no. My children are comfortable telling me anything, and they made it clear that nothing like that had happened. Since then, my ex and his wife have changed their story about the incident. Their new version is that the boy misbehaved, and when my ex tried to talk to him, the boy hit him first. According to them, the mother then hit her son to pull him off my ex. Child protection authorities here are very strict when dealing with cases like this, especially if the harm to the child is severe. I haven't seen the teenager myself. As a result, the teenager has been placed in a shelter for abused youth. Edit. When physical abuse of minors is reported, the child is transferred to a safe space until a Gesell chamber interview and forensic medical evaluation can take place. Once it is confirmed that the child is in a safe environment, they are returned to the parent.